Welcome. Welcome to Qbase's 7 ways to improve your marketing using data. My name is Matt. I work with our customers on understanding their problems and helping design solutions. Paresh is our consultancy director and has worked with data for over 30 years. We work for a company called Qbase, which specializes in data services and management, connecting data together, building insight, and delivering marketing journeys and campaigns for our customers. We're joined by James Alty, the Managing Director of Apteco Marketing Suite, which is a software which turns insight into action for marketing departments. Now, a little bit of housekeeping before we get going. If you're unfamiliar with Join GoToWebinar, please put any questions that you have around content, around what we're talking about, or anything you'd like to know, please put that into the questions area within the webinar window. If you're having any technical issues, please pop those into the chat. And we've got a team on standby who will hopefully be able to help you out. Now, before we start, we're just going to start a quick poll to get some information on what you use and what platforms you use. So we can see there on the screen, we have what platforms do you currently use, which store data. So please pick the ones that apply to you. So we've got CRM, we've got web analytics platform, email marketing platform, accounting platform, or social media analytics tool. Just give you a few minutes to select some of those options, and then we'll be moving on. We'll quickly see some of the results as they're coming live. Just a few more moments there. Okay, let's go to the results. Okay, so most people, as we'd expect, most people on the call have got CRM is the main option. Second one there is email marketing platform, which again, no surprises there. Okay, so thank you very much everybody for that. Right, so moving on with the webinar. Now, we're all here to see 7 ways to improve your marketing using data. But let's first start with getting data wrong. Now, most of us are familiar with Starbucks getting everyone's name wrong. And this is a great example of where bad data capture can lead to a poor experience, especially for that person waiting in line, hearing Kark being called out as their name. Now, data is held across multiple platforms these days, and not all of those platforms necessarily talk to each other. Most organizations will have a CRM, which in the past was the one place to manage all of an organization's customer data. But as technology has advanced and been able to collect more and more data over the past decade or so, we've ended up with data in different places. And all of these different platforms and silos of data don't necessarily talk to each other. Just to give you an example, take a look at the masses of data that can be collected with web browser data. There's data there about how long people have been browsing on a web page, what browser they're actually using, and where they are in the world. But it's very rare that all of this data is hooked up with the person in your CRM. If it was, then you might be able to offer that person a better experience next time they arrive on your site, or you might be able to upsell them because you'd know what pages they've been looking at recently. Now, I've just spoken about website data, just as one example, but there are tons more platforms out there that manage data separately, like mobile data, permissions data, call center data, sales data, enhancements like demographic overlays, like census data or surveys. You've got events data or campaign marketing and email marketing, and that's just to name a few. So at this point, I'll hand over to Paresh to tell us some more.
Thank you, Matt. So when used effectively, data is a valuable asset that helps business perform better, drive revenue, boost customer satisfaction, and optimize your marketing expenditure. However, when data is decentralized and disorganized, data becomes an obstacle rather than an asset. So the first way of improving your marketing is to bring your data together into what we call a 360-degree view of your customer. Some people call this a single customer view or one view of the truth. But having a clear view of your customer data in a centralized location means you can access the data and make data-driven decisions quickly. Consistency is improved. Everyone is working from the same data and insights across all departments. You can enhance your customer journeys by being more personalized and tailoring their experience. Forecasts are more reliable. Centralizing data also saves time and money in terms of accessing the data. And you also have strong data governance, i.e. there are less opportunities of mishandling information when centralized compared to having data managed in silos. The more you can see the full data picture, the more you can learn from this and use it to feed into your marketing strategy. So far I've talked about the benefits of why bringing your data together is important. The question is, where do you give this data a home? Typically, you want to make sure all this data is stored in what we call data warehouses and data lakes, which are all connected to your source systems, which provide data on a frequent basis, some of which is live, such as social data, and others may be batch, like daily CRM feeds. How this data is then tied together and presented needs to be based on your marketing goals and what you want to get out of that data. So make sure, if you are thinking about bringing data together, that you have clearly defined what you need to get out of it before you begin. So, James, do you want to tell me a little bit more about how you might approach this with your technology?
Yes, thank you, Paresh. It's a challenge. We see organisations with data in silos right across the organisation, different channels, different products, different parts of the business, all creating silos, and we need to help break those down. Now, some of the challenges in breaking that down is, where can you find data for linkage? You know, what sort of identifiers do you have on the data already? And it could be a customer account number or a supporter number. It could be something like an email address that's used to link data. It could be identifiers that you use and track links in your digital communications, your digital marketing activity. But we need to get that data and then use a product like an ETL, extract, transform, and load tool, to pull that data into some sort of software platform, whether it's in your data warehouse, your single customer view platform, or into an analytics platform like ours. You need to get that data brought together so that we can get a full view of the value of each customer. As you said, you need to see everything that customer is doing so that you can understand the value, but also so you can understand the supporter journey or the customer journey. Which channels are they interacting with? Which communications are they responding to? So I think the challenge is for everyone to look across every data store, every silo, find all those interactions, and then define those to the data processing systems to pull that together. In our case, we do it with an ETL. We pull a snapshot of that data and then do updates to that snapshot so that we can get a platform of data that you can use. So let me pass over to Matt. He'll talk to us about data quality, how you can check the quality of that data that we're pulling together.
Excellent, thanks, James. Okay, so we've already learned that a lot of data is in multiple places and across multiple systems. We know that there can be multiple versions of you sat across these multiple systems. Take, for example, myself. I can be called Matthew or Matt. I've also lived at multiple addresses over my lifetime, and I use different email addresses. So here's a recent result from Validity, who did the state of the CRM data management issue, where they found that 27% of marketers said that bad data costs them 10% or more in lost revenue, and that's every year. Paresh, can you tell us a little bit more here?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's a phenomenal statistic when we're talking about 10% or more. I mean, that is amazing. But yeah, I mean, so here are some things you need to think about to ensure you're working with good quality data in that centralized system that I was talking about earlier. And the first step, and it's a very important step, is data validation. And this is about, is the data you have accurate and ready to use? For example, does an email address look like an email address, or is there a chunk missing? The good news is that there are integration tools that can be programmed to do the validation for you and actually highlight any exceptions of bad data back to your data providers for continuous improvements in delivering good quality data every time. Hygiene, is the data clean? Is there anything in there that shouldn't be? Are there any bad characters? Good data hygiene practices lead to an increased efficiency in lead generation, lead tracking, and proper personalization. Standardization. When we talk about standardization, how are you governing new data which is brought in? How are you making it sure it's standardized and of good quality? It's ensuring that when that data is being centralized, all your suppliers are providing it in the right format, containing the right data that is consistent. When we talk about deduplication, identifying and removing duplicates is essential for minimizing marketing waste and annoying customers and supporters. No one wants to be sent the same newsletter 3 times. It's annoying, and it looks like the business doesn't know what they're doing. And again, many technologies provide deduplication algorithms which can give you control and how tight or loose you want to identify those duplicates. Merging, given the fact that customers can engage through multiple touch points through different platforms at different times, the chances of their contact details being captured several times is high. The question is, which one do you keep? Well, merging multiple instances of the record into one is ensuring that you have their contact and permission details up to date, which is essential for contactability and reachability purposes. We call this the golden record, and it is actually a standard practice that marketers are very welcoming to the golden record piece, and it's ensuring that the best quality record is selected for marketing activities each time, every time. And finally, screening. Many third-party data files exist, such as NCOAs, which is called National Change of Address, water screen and deceased screen files, and channel preference files such as TPS and NPS. So making sure you can contact your records matched against these files ensures that you've done the due diligence to make sure that your database is up to date, ensuring that you are not contacting the people that you're not supposed to. And then moving on to, there's a lot there around data quality. And one of the things that we've come up with here at Qbase is called the DQR program. Now, I'm not going to go into the detail about this for now, but happy for you guys to get in touch with me afterwards. But it will help you define this process. And we've actually implemented this, tried and tested with numerous charities and enterprises throughout. It's completely technology agnostic, and it provides the building blocks for data quality management with governance and collaboration in mind between different stakeholders. And stakeholders could be SMEs, and they are subject matter experts, developers, and of course, business users such as marketeers who have first-hand experience from the impact of bad data. So James, can you talk about how your technology can automate and address data quality, please?
Yeah, so for sure we can help with those data validation and screening type processes. We can look at filtering and identifying data. We can look at exceptions, and all the technology that we use for targeting for marketing communications can be used for marketing data quality reporting as well. So our platforms can be used to output the exceptions on a schedule, on every data refresh, looking for those issues in the data that need following up. But I think you can move beyond the simple single field validation and start looking at patterns in the data. We can start looking at inconsistencies. We can look, for example, where channel preferences don't match channel use, where the pattern of transactions doesn't match the values that we seem to associate with that supporter, for example. So you can start to look at the correlation between various different elements in the data, and then use automated processes to either fix that data in flight, as you do in one of those steps in the DQR program, and we quite often see that in our platforms, where people are loading data that doesn't come up to scratch, but we can produce cleaned up data handles that are then useful for analytics, useful for output in flight, even if you haven't yet solved the problem at the source. But we can also produce the data feeds that go back to the source systems with identifiers, with indicators for the fault, so that those can be improved back at the source system. Obviously, that's helping us start to understand the customer. You start to look at patterns on the customer's data, you're starting to understand those. So Matt, perhaps you can tell us more about how we know our customers.
Sure. Thanks, James. So now we have our data connected and it's accurate. Our next step is to use it to understand our customers better. Your data can help you understand who your customer is, what they like and dislike, their attitudes and behaviors, and more. By segmenting your customers based on this data, it allows you to build personas representing different customer groups. This then allows you to tailor campaigns with the right messages and promotions to those personas, which ultimately leads to heightened customer engagement increased revenue streams, and enhanced customer loyalty. Paresh, how do we do this?
Okay, yeah, so I know it's pretty obvious, but knowing your customer through good, clean, accurate, centralized data will help build the insights and reporting power you need to deliver amazing customer experiences through relevant personalized customer journeys. So we begin by understanding the basic fundamentals in knowing your customers through exploratory analysis, or what we call deep dive analysis, and getting a view of some of those baseline numbers. For example, how many unique deduplicated customers can I market to in my database and by what channel? What do my customer retention rates look like over time? What products are they purchasing by my customers? Do my marketing programs work? And if so, with who? What does my best customers look like? In fact, what is best? So we do this by getting an understanding of your customer and to answer the whys. And once we've got a solid base understanding, we can then start to think about the next steps, which is to segment our customers. And this is driven by an objective or a goal, depending on what you're trying to achieve. So I'm just going to give you an example. We worked with the RLI, and the RLI wanted to change the focus of their fundraising to place the support at the heart of their activities, delivering only relevant and personalized communications to each supporter. So by segmenting their customers based on the demographics, the attitudes, geography, lifestyle, behavior, literally the full works, and we talked about personas, we built these personas, and we actually call those personas tribes. So they were able to use these personas and run much more targeted and less wasteful campaigns. And as you can see, it was a success in many areas. Initially, they tested the tribes on a Christmas campaign, and the result was they saved about £25,000 in marketing costs. But then they actually rolled it out to a big summer campaign, and they actually increased their response rate by 53% and generated an additional £285,000 worth of income. But by using the personas, they were able to target audiences that they would have never normally have gone to with the right personalization. So James, can you tell me a little bit more about your tool in terms of how we can interrogate data, please?
Yeah, and actually the RNLI is a fantastic example of this whole topic. An organisation over 100 years old, maybe over 150 years old, who had data in silos. The organisational structure had kept the data separate. By bringing it together, they were able to see the supporter base and start achieving these sorts of numbers. How do you go about that? Well, you can start super simple, a one-way targeting, a selection, getting some idea of the volume of data you have in a particular target group within the database. But you'll quickly move on to looking at the interactions between data. So then looking at a two-way breakdown, looking at data broken down by another data value. And analysts will quickly start to learn from the proportions and the absolute numbers in those breakdowns where the value is. You can look at measuring not just the number of supporters or the number of customers, but also the value. And then we can start looking at comparisons. We can compare one group with another. They're doing something like a profile. It's a univariate technique, looking at one variable at a time to see where there is under and over representation in a group you are interested in compared with a base group. Perhaps you're interested in all the people who made a donation compared with all the people that you communicated with, for example. And you can start to identify what are the data attributes you know of those supporters is giving you some insight. Now, with Apteco, we move a bit beyond that nowadays so that we will also look at behavioral modeling. So we start to bring together data across multiple different interactions, and this typically is across multiple channels, looking at the supporter journey or customer journey across a timeline, looking to see what are the characteristics of those supporters who are high value compared with those supporters who are low value or growing value. And right now we're looking at the sequencing of those activities across a timeline, so we can see which events trigger or appear to predict other behaviours, and we can then try to interact, and that might be to prevent churn, or it might be to prompt a high-value donation or purchase, for example. So lots of techniques, starting simple, get something done now with the data you've got, and then grow the layers of understanding using tools to give both multi-way breakdowns of data and comparison of data. So Matt, perhaps you can tell us about how we use those sorts of techniques on our supporters and customers to start targeting our audience.
Yeah, thanks, James. Well, before we do that, we are going to talk about how you select an audience, but I'd like to learn a little bit more about the people on the call, on the webinar. We're going to go to a quick poll, and we're going to understand how you select your audiences at the moment. So we have a quick poll on the screen. So how do you currently make an audience selection? Got a few options on there. You may not be the person who actually makes the selection, so you may ask the data team. You can create your own segments in your own CRM system. You can create a list in your mailing tool, or you could use SQL. There may be other things as well, so we've got another option on there. We're only limited to 5 options, but yeah, so little options there for you. Please pick away at the poll. We'll give you a moment, and then we'll go through and we'll have a look at the results. Okay, excellent. Just bring up the results. Okay, great. So we've got a lot of people seem to be asking the data team, or they create it within their mailing tool. Seem to be the top ones, and then other seems to be the next one. That's interesting. Thanks very much for that, everybody. Okay, so let's go on to about selecting your audience. So now this is all about selecting the right audience for the offering that you're sending. If you get this wrong, you waste a lot of money on marketing and reduce your ROI. Just because you have a segment doesn't mean you have a selection. Using your segmentation will only get you so far. Selecting an audience is about selecting the right people for your objective. Now, one situation we see, which by the sounds of things, quite a lot of you will probably be in this situation, is that the data team is typically responsible for selecting an audience, and the marketing team are the ones providing a brief. Now, as you can imagine, or as quite a lot of people already know, is that there's a lot of back and forth between the two groups, where the marketing team are having to react to the counts as they come in, and often they end up casting the net wider and wider just to get that volume right, which of course compromises what we're trying to do, which is personalized and targeted marketing. So my message would be to let the data inform your marketing plans in the first place. Have that transparency between the data team and the marketing team so you can be proactive with audience selection rather than being reactive. Paresh, do you want to expand on that?
Sure, absolutely. Well, a typical process starts with the first flow. Nothing wrong with this. You start off by defining your objective and goal, which could be customer-led, i.e. I want to increase the first to second order conversion rate, or actually campaign or promotional-led, such as I want to increase the response rates and total income for our product range in a catalog that we send out. Sounds simple, right? Yes, if you're a marketeer, but ensuring that your message has the same meaning to the data selection expert as well as the creative team may very well be different. So the objective should be clear, concise, and meaningful to you and those that are involved in supporting you in delivering it. There's no harm in asking those involved to play back their understanding of what the objective is and what's expected of each other in delivering the audience for the marketing promotion, as an example. Who is available in the audience that you want to select that best fits the requirement? If you're segmenting customers based on their purchase behavior, then the segmentation may identify which people are likely to purchase. What you need to establish at this stage is how many of those people can you contact and by what channel. This is where we start to select the data that meets the activity you are looking to do. How does it fit into the wider plan? This is all about looking ahead. Who will be selected? When and what will you send them? This is where you start to map out what your marketing program will look like, so you can start to optimize or think about the optimization of your return on investment and your customer value metrics, such as lifetime value. And finally, the final selection is very simple in terms of identifying a group of customers who will be included in the activity. What channels are you going to be using to communicate to them? And what types of personalization are you going to be doing with them? The final selection should also consider test and control groups, so you can actually measure the uplift of the activity you are going to do against baseline figures. So I'm going to give you another example, and this is for a charity that we worked with, the NSPCC. and it was using audience selections to reduce their cost and optimize their engagement. So when we think about charities, we think about the supporter life cycle, and one of the ambitions is for supporters to leave a gift in their will for the charity that they're supporting. We worked with the charity to build a multi-tier prediction model that would identify people who would inquire, attend events, and leave a pledge to leave a gift in their will for the charity. And previously, quite often, when they were doing the activities, they would select event locations which were chosen within the UK, which were quite large in size, and quite often the attendees were in some cases quite high, but the conversion rate to pledging a gift was low. And these guys actually went back to some of these event locations, but they never worked as well because the attendee rates were very low. So our predictive models not only identified which supporters were likely to attend, but also what the expected conversion rates would be. And this meant that the charity could reduce the size of the venue and select locations where likely attendees and conversion rates were highest, which had never been to before. So the net effect was an overall saving on expenditure with smaller venues and higher conversion rates to pledges. And on average, they received a 6% response rate based on using this methodology compared to previously, which was at 2%. So it's a big, big difference for those guys. So James, can you talk about sharing data here and how you can use the predictive modeling techniques a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. I think it's a great example you've used there because you talked about using a predictive model, and that's where we can move on. Right, rather than just using logic rules on your data, you can use analytical techniques to build predictive models in your data that can generate scores or segments for you that you will use to do your campaign targeting. So we can create propensity to respond models, or we can create demand estimation models that can help you decide first who to talk to, and then to estimate the value of the people that you are speaking to, the organizations, consumers, the supporters that you are speaking to. And by using that targeting, we can ensure that we're picking the best people from the database without needing the marketing and the analysts, marketing team and the analysts to create such complex selections. We've seen selections in our applications running to hundreds of criteria with lots of regulatory obligations in there, but also very complex, detailed selections. And that's fine if you've got the manpower and the time to really work on that detail. But by using predictive modeling techniques, learning from the characteristics exhibited in your data, by looking at existing supporters and customers, learn from that, build segments from your models and scores. And that can then act to produce the right target groups, which means through personalisation, we can then give a great customer or supporter experience. So Matt, perhaps you can move us on to how we might use personalisation once we've decided who to communicate with.
Sure. Okay, so now we have the audience, right? But how do we talk to them? When and about what? This is where organizations see a lot of blockers. Typically, we see year-long campaign plans, which are decided well in advance, and they are based on budget constraints and set volumes with targeted ROIs. But a lot of the time, this isn't delivering what the right message is to your customers at the right time and using the right channel. The organization is deciding when, what, and how, which of course is not good personalization. In a recent study run by Alty Technologies, it stated that personalization increased awareness by 29%, consideration by 5%, and purchasing intent by 36%. And according to another recent study by Accenture, they found that 3 personalization tactics that have direct effect on buying behavior is Know My Name, which is 56% of customers would rather buy from a retailer that recognizes them by name. Know My Past, where 65% of customers prefer to buy from a retailer who knows their purchase history. And Know What I Want, which is 58% of customers prefer to buy from a retailer that recommends options based on their past purchases. So, Paresh, can you tell us how to personalize for a better customer experience?
Yeah, sure. This is where everything we have previously learned about our customer now starts to come together. So you can delight your customers with compelling journeys. We know who they are, we know how they behave, and we know what they're interested in and when. We also know what channels we can reach out to them through. It's now about planning your journey for your customer and understanding what content and message should be delivered and what levels of personalization you can do, and ensuring that you are delivering a consistent message throughout. So the first thing is break it down using the customer lifecycle. And what do I mean by that? Well, trying to deliver an end-to-end customer journey, let's say from acquisition to win back, can feel like an unachievable task. So consider breaking this down to each part of the life cycle when you are addressing personalization. Consider next best action. So personalization should also consider the predictive capability. James talked about some of the predictive capability earlier on. And this is such as next best action, and that could be next best content, next best message, based on how your customers behave or not. Also think about A/B testing. I've mentioned this before. Remember to test your personalization using A/B testing programs so you can have a continuous test and learn cycle on what does and doesn't work. And finally, look back at what's worked. As part of the deep dive analysis and understanding your customers, look back at what personalization has worked well in the context of your segmentation tool, or indeed any other touch points not previously available but now fully centralized. So James, how do you operationalize customer journeys using your technology?
Well, we have a multi-stage, multi-channel campaign management tool, and in that we can create communication points with customization, personalization, and testing. Personalization we're talking about here is what you referred to as know my name. Make sure that the communication is addressed appropriately, speaks in the right language with the right tone to that person. And actually the right tone is part of customization. Know my history, know how close I am to the brand or the charity, and make sure that we're using that history to customize the offer or the ask or the communication appropriately for that individual. So personalizing the details, customizing the offer or the request, for example, and then using testing. And testing allows us to do continuous A/B tests. We have a mechanism called automated alternatives that allows us to continuously check the champion treatment or against the challenger or the next challenger. And we will run those at 80-20 ratios until we see that a champion exceeds the challenger and becomes the new king. And that piece of content will then be used automatically until another piece can show a better return. So all of that is about what we're saying in the communication. But we can actually go beyond that and decide what communication or what supporter or customer journey we take this individual on. So rather than scheduling and triggering activity purely from our marketing machinery, let's use the data to build models and scores that we can then use to optimize which communication journey each recipient gets. So as they conclude one stage of their supporter journey, for example, we use a model to determine what communication campaign is most appropriate for them next. And that allows the machinery and the data to drive the process. It's not driven and determined by the marketing plan, it's determined by the data. So, Matt, I think you're going to talk to us about some examples of automation that can help.
Cool. Thanks, James. Okay, so everything sounds pretty complicated at this stage. There's a lot of different messages going out to different customers, and there are lots of tools and processes involved here. Now, over the years, we've seen some very complex process flows, especially for campaign selections. And many of these have been simpler than what James and Paresh have already been describing. Sometimes organizations see increasing the sophistication of their marketing programs as complex and challenging. However, many of the exciting things we've already spoken about so far today do need human intervention to make it work, but software and technology is doing much of the heavy lifting. The human intervention is there to add the business knowledge, validate, and maintain the processes are working. Much of the existing complex processes are actually simplified when you introduce the right technology. You can make your data work hard for you using automation tools. This actually makes your processes simpler and allows you to focus on the fun aspects of your work. So Paresh, can you tell us how this would help with the customer journey?
Absolutely. So once you've planned your customer journey based on the data you have, You find the automation tool to implement this. And if your data is now correctly segmented and tagged, you don't have to look at everyone on a case-by-case basis, what the next step is for them. You can rely on algorithms to do that for you. So for example, if you have 2 customers that are sent a marketing email and one of them makes a purchase, you don't want someone to having to manually record that they've made that purchase and remember that for next time when they interact with you. You want them to be automatically tagged in your database and put into the correct customer journey. So by using the data, we can plan out our customer journeys. We can also introduce automation at the time, getting more and more personalized and more complex with our customer journeys. And automation isn't just about the automation of the journeys. There's also elements about automating the single customer view that I talked about before to get to this point as well. So James, talk a little bit about the integrations of people stage that you talked about, particularly around the social channels and the CRM integrations of real-time triggers, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so part of the challenge of automation is not just the flow, not just the schedule, not just the triggers, but actually how we're communicating and what we're listening to. So we work continuously to integrate our platform with multiple different communication channels. Those could be traditional offline print channels, they could be contact centers, perhaps most dominant in recent years, the email broadcasting engines, going through to review sites and social, as you say, in-app messaging and point of sale integration, for example. But in each case, we try to ensure that we're looking at what comes back as well as the communication. So reacting to the interactions and inaction through those channels can help us. And we have an example actually where automation helped one of our clients. It's an MOT business. They achieved a higher rate of MOT bookings through automation, through the appropriate channel to their current customers. But the main thing it did is it saved 4 man days a month in terms of effort because the integration was there. It was simple in a single platform. And the metric that perhaps struck me most was they described that they reduced their stress by 90% because it was all connected up. You know, the people involved were no longer stressed in running that process. So yeah, whether you're putting evergreen content onto a social network, whether you're doing custom audiences for adverts to lookalikes on social, whether you're communicating through email, look for that integration so that the automation platform can really deliver end to end all the way through for you. And Matt, I think we'll wrap up with the 7th topic, looking at how we measure what we're doing.
Yeah, definitely. Great. So, as we've already discussed, organizations have lots of data, which is hopefully now collected. But understanding what is important to monitor within this data is key to being successful. The more we are monitoring the right KPIs, the more we can improve any marketing activity going forward. Take, for example, the Net Promoter Score, which is widely used by organizations to understand their customer loyalty. A high Net Promoter Score has been shown as a good indicator for future growth. But just focusing on this data alone, on this KPI alone, won't make for a very good strategy. We need to understand what is contributing to this. For example, what data can you collect about customer reviews? What is your customer lifecycle data telling you? Or how long do people spend on your website? It is all about using the data available to create appropriate and considered KPIs. Paresh, how do you work with our customers here?
Well, I mean, the first thing is the good news is that the process of knowing your customer through the deep dive analysis that I talked about will reveal the insights that can then be turned into future metrics to measure your success in the future. But the first point that I've got on the board here is link KPIs to objectives. This is really, really important because we started off at the beginning about your goals and your objectives, and you need to start off right from the offset about defining what those KPIs should always be. The second thing that you need to consider is the contributing objectives. So what are contributing to those top level KPIs in terms of your headline goals? What data can you monitor here which will give you more visibility around how your campaigns are working? And when I talk about visibility, the other bit about visibility is make sure that everyone in your team or in company has visibility of the KPIs, so they can see this. And supporting those KPIs, have a glossary of terms, because glossary of terms by definition is an explanation of what those KPI means to different departments, so they can understand it. And that will actually crystallize the meaning to each department. So, James, could you talk a little bit more about KPIs and how you can present them in your technology and so on?
And how to make them visible. It's a great example. We nowadays deliver a dashboarding experience in the web, so your colleagues throughout the organization can use a simple dashboard view to look at the KPIs, to see breakdowns of the data associated with those KPIs, to interact with those breakdowns on multiple dimensions, looking at different variables, making visual data selections to drill into the interesting subsets, find where the high points are, and then able to use that target audience to review data in the browser, or perhaps to create a target group that's going to be used for a campaign. And those dashboards can be shared, as I said, internally. You can share with a colleague who can then share that on free of charge to other people in the organization. So that insight, the KPIs, can be made visible, not just by your knowledge of who needs it, but by the organization finding those paths itself, and then sharing that external out to other providers and agencies that you are working with. So it allows you to really build a broad consensus around that data. And that dashboard can include notes and annotations to help describe the KPIs that are being used, all with the aim that we improve the understanding and can feed back to the communication campaigns that are driving our business or organization activity. So hopefully, Matt, we've shown a nice conclusion where data that we started with has come all the way through to a beautiful presentation that's available to lots of people. Do you want to just sum that up for us?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, James. So let's just do a quick summary of all of the key takeaways for us. We've got 7 ways to improve your marketing using data. The first one, obviously, bring all your data together. We've got get your data quality right, know your customer, select the right audience, personalize for a better customer experience, and let data drive automation, and ultimately report on the right KPIs. So going on to just very finally, just want to say thank you to everybody for coming. I hope you found it useful, and any questions that we haven't answered, I'm sure we'll get back to you. Now, there is a survey at the end of this webinar, so we'd really, really appreciate it if you could just stick around and fill it in. But yeah, I suppose we've got a couple of minutes left. We want to have a little. Have we got time to have a little look, or are we calling it there?
We don't have any outstanding questions at the moment, Matt, so I think probably we'll just ask people to complete the survey and give us their feedback on the session.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.